My name is Tina Jordan, and I'm the Vice President of Membership for AFCEA International. I'm excited to welcome you to today's panel hosted by AFCEA IDEA. As our membership grows, AFCEA would like to make sure that every individual feels represented within our organization. AFCEA IDEA, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility, strives to promote diversity across all of our endeavors. Although this panel is comprised of a diverse group of individuals, each panelist was chosen as they are experts on the topic of zero trust. We appreciate your time and support for our panelists today, and you're in for a great session with this impressive group. This panel would not be possible without the support of our session sponsor, Sienna, represented here today by Jason Stahl, Defense Senior Account Manager. We truly appreciate Sienna's generous and continued support for our IDEA efforts, along with their co-sponsor, FedData. So please join me in a warm AFCEA welcome for Jason Stahl, who will say a few words about Sienna and then introduce our moderator and the panelists. Jason, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for everyone for attending today. As the optical backbone equipment provider for DISA since 2003, Sienna enjoys a long-standing partnership with AFCEA to stimulate thought and development such as this in the telecom industry to help support the warfighter. As a 22-year-old, or 22, not 22 anymore, the 22-year veteran, the United States Navy, it's always nice to come back to Hawaii and see the changes that are making, but also understand the needs of the warfighter and make sure that we're properly supporting that. Thank you all for attending today's panel hosted by the AFCEA IDEA program, Moving Coalition Engagement Towards Zero Trust Cybersecurity Principles. I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's panel, Stephanie Hutch. Stephanie Malia Hutch is the founder and president of Makai LLC, a native Hawaiian-owned 8A firm based in Massachusetts. Makai specializes in DoD weapon systems integration and wireless and wired network modernization. Stephanie will introduce our panelists and moderate the discussion. So please join me in a warm welcome for Stephanie Hutch.
Aloha. Thank you all very much for being here. Thanks, Linda. I'm Stephanie Hutch. I'll be moderating the discussion today. Before we start, I'd like to briefly introduce our panel members, and please note that full bios can be found on the conference website. After introductions, we will roll into our panel discussion, and we will have time for questions throughout our panel today. So if you can think of any questions, please submit them via email to askmeindopac@gmail.com. Our first panelist is Ms. Jane Rathbun. Ms. Rathbun currently serves as the Dawn CIO, driving continuous improvement and innovation of the Navy's IT portfolio. Prior to this role, Ms. Rathbun served in a dual-hatted capacity as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Information Warfare and Enterprise Services. Next, Mr. Paul Nicholson. Mr. Nicholson is the Executive Director for Coalition Communications and the Deputy CIO within INDOPACOM. Next, we have Mr. Emran Umar. He is the Principal Cyber Solutions Architect that spearheads zero trust initiatives across Booz Allen in support of the DoD, federal, civilian, and intelligence community. And finally, Mr. Mel Yokoyama. Mr. Yokoyama is a U.S. retired Navy fellow Kanaka-Oiwi, native Hawaiian, and he is the president and co-founder of Decisive Instincts, LLC, a native Hawaiian organization 8A firm. Welcome, panelists. Thank you.
Wow.
So again, thank you all very much for being here. Before we get started with the panel discussion, I do have an icebreaker question for everyone. So my question is, what is one job that you've had that might surprise others to learn that you've had? And what impact did that have on you, positive or negative?
What is one job we've had?
Yes.
I mean, I've been a cyber solution architect since I can remember, so it's been a fun job for me, and I've just been enjoying it.
Great. Ma'am?
Well, so I've had a lot of jobs across the Department of Defense and NASA in practically every major process in the department. But early in my career, before joining Defense, I was an executive recruiter for the robotics industry. I didn't even know what a servo motor was when I was 26 years old, but that's what I did. And I was actually telling the team this story this morning that I recruited a young man out of University of Illinois who in 1987 was 89 was a C++ expert. So this is new, right? C++ at the time. And I recruited him for General Electric and convinced him not to join the priesthood and go to work for General Electric. And if he decided he wanted to be a priest later, he could go do that. So that would be the odd job.
Thank you. Sir?
I would say that much earlier in my life, I worked on a farm. And living in the country of North Carolina, and we had all the normal farm animals plus tobacco and cotton and peanuts. The absolute hardest job I've ever had. So I learned that your day started extremely early and it ended extremely late, and it was mandated by the farm. And so I realized that if I could do farm work, I could do anything.
There you go.
So as soon as I could leave that farm, I did. But it was a lesson about hard work. So the idea of starting early and finishing late, unfortunately, that hasn't changed. but it's not in the heat. Good.
Thank you. Mel?
Aloha. I think for me, what's kind of relates to this panel and the topic is I was fortunate enough to spend as an embedded person, both in military and as a contractor, for 2 different countries. One with Iraq, so I was embedded with the Iraqi Ministry of Defense, helping them modernize their cybersecurity networks. And also with Albania in Eastern Europe, got to lead and help support last year's big cyber attack that they had. So I think I'm coming more from that operational perspective. So I'm looking forward to the panel.
Thank you very much. For our first question, ma'am, I'd like to start with you. So thinking about zero trust from an organizational perspective, how do you define zero trust? What is it and why now? Why zero trust now? And how is it different from some of our previous security strategies?
Great question. I think first and foremost, it is not a compliance thing. We do not want it to be RMF 2.0, the son of RMF. Zero trust is a framework that guides you in how to design your networks and your IT enterprise in a secure way that is looking at not holistically perimeter defense, but really looking at protecting the data, getting focused on the data.
Great. Thank you. Imran, from an industry perspective, how are you seeing zero trust being defined?
Yeah, to piggyback to what she was saying, for the last 20 years, we've done defense in depth, we've done perimeter security, and we know that the nation-state actors are inside our network. When you had the U.S. ambassador for China, the e-commerce secretary, their emails being monitored by the Chinese, we know there's a problem. So we need to move towards this new solution where we're just not protecting the perimeter. We know the bad actors are inside our environment, and we need to fundamentally change how we do security, which is continuous monitoring, conditional access that needs to be implemented as part of Zero Trust rollout. And I agree, Zero Trust is not a product it's an architecture that needs to be integrated and implemented.
Great. Mr. Nicholson, Mel, any other comments?
So I would add everything that they've said already, which is great. When INDOPACOM is looking at Zero Trust, within our theater and with our vast array of partners, we have to look at it as an opportunity, right? So we're in a theater where many of our partners, they are diplomatic, information, military, and economic. Across the dime, they have dependencies with some of the nations that we may not believe or follow all of their norms. They have dependencies with the PRC. They have dependencies with Russia. So in an environment where you have to have partners that are connected at the data level with countries that you don't agree with all of their actions, if you have to exchange information, then we need a way to exchange information securely with those partners. And so our domain-centric approach that we had was insufficient, and now we have a transformation to look at a data-centric approach where all of our countries we can have our dependencies across the dime and still protect the data when it comes to a national security, defense of the region, defense of the Indo-Pacific's perspective without fear of losing that data. We still have to fight to protect it, but so ZT, the framework, presents us an opportunity to do more with the very partners that we have to have alliances with.
Great.
I guess from an industry perspective, I'm not sure if Mr. Resnick's in the audience, but when it comes to the DoD Zero Trust architecture, there are two objectives. You have your target objectives and your advanced objectives. You can look it up on the internet. So from an industry perspective, when we're working with the client is, okay, for the first target, which is COA 1, there are 91 activities and capabilities that needs to be completed, I guess before FY27. So, how can we help our customers, our government customers, with achieving that? Now, that's just the mandate. But when it comes to zero trust, it's really about reducing implicit trust. And it's an outcome-based, as Ms. Rathbun says. It's not compliance-based, it's outcome-based. But what is the outcome? So the outcome is, I guess the North Star is reducing lateral movement from networks. You don't want to be hacked in this subnet or this network, and it reaches all the way across. And this is all based on the OMB breach back in 2015.
Great, thank you. So looking at the mission partner environment, how are we executing zero trust today? Are there any examples we can share?
So starting from that, setting the context, most of us know that mission partner or coalition networks have been fostered across the department probably since the mid-90s. And I heard that some of my friends from CENTCOM are here, and so I'd give them the credit with their community of interest network, the COIN network, back in like 1995. And so then there was the event, the terrorist attack event, and there was an explosion of coalition networks around the globe with the War on Terrorism campaign and the Violent Extremist Organization. But as that explosion happened, even in our theater, as that explosion happened, we was building the Combined Enterprise Regional Information Exchange System networks. I think there were approximately 57 of those domain-centric networks that we was building, and was fighting hard to defend them all, and to some extent failing miserably, right? And I say that because you invite in a DISA compliance, or you invite in the NSA blue teams come in, and you were far from unscathed. You barely survived that, and you was almost embarrassed by the things that they found. So at the domain-centric level, we weren't doing good. And so, again, as I spoke earlier, along comes zero trust. And so with National Security Memorandum 8 and NSM 10, with the mandates to implement things like zero trust, from a Indo-PACOM perspective, having a vast array of networks with our partners across the theater, this was our opportunity to think about, well, will we rebuild the Centrix environments? And so the answer's already been given, right? Very much agreeable with that. So then the team, the J6 team, and Dan Wade and the engineers and the team, they said, we want to build from scratch the zero trust stack in accordance with all the principles and the alliances with those zero trust requirements. They said it would be more cost effective to start over than it would be to try to go modernize these things that are, one, already used in operations. No one wants to inhibit operations or break the as-is fight. So it gave us the opportunity to begin rapidly learning from CENTCOM, learning from UCOM. It gave us to rapidly start doing experimentation with DISA and Cyber Command. So we went at this thing from a very collaborative, very, very collaborative approach. Again, like I said, we have NSA engineers on our team. We have support with DISA. We have support with CIA. We have across the board. And we've had many tech exchange meetings with other COCOMs. So we was doing the horizontal integration. We was working with DoD CIO, Joint Staff, and CDAO. So we was doing the vertical integration to make sure of that. And we're all tied into LOE5 of JADC2 to make sure that was tied in.
So I was lucky enough
Right.
to get a briefing of your zero trust environment from Colonel Wade yesterday. I'm very impressed with what you've done. I think that it's great you've got all of the mechanical pieces and you've gotten the approval that it meets the 151 or comes close to meeting the 151. I know you're waiting for the certification, and that's fantastic. But I also had a great conversation with your team about not the technical pieces of what needs to happen, but to make this operationally useful.
Right.
I don't have to build it 100 times. I could use the network that was built not just for INDOPACOM, but for all of the other COCOMs. But I need a set of business rules of how coalition partners work with us in that environment. Who is the commander and controller of that environment? How do we, a big gap area, how do we create the identity source? Identity and access management is critical to the framework, the zero trust framework. And
Right.
so we know how we're going to do that for DoD. We know what
Right.
the identity source will be for our sailors, Marines, airmen, et cetera, civilians, because we have, CAT cards and we know where to get our identity. But for our mission partners, we're going to have to figure out what that identity ecosystem is to really make what you've built, again, approved, not approved, but has been red teamed and looked at and
Right.
meets a lot of the criteria of zero trust. Right thing to do. The other thing that needs to happen is how we're going to make data flow into that environment to be consumed by whatever mission you have going on. And I think those are, again, not challenges of zero trust, but challenges of how to operationalize a zero trust model.
No doubt. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So my perspective on that would be first thing, the DoD and MILDAP COCOMs are making a journey to move towards zero trust. That's number one. So we know actively UCOM, AFRICOM, and other agencies are working with DISA to take a look at things like DISA Thunderdome, which is their zero trust initiative. Secondly, the mission partners, they may not have the same budget, the same capabilities as we do. So I know DoD CIO is actively engaged with them to share lessons learned, best practices. But kind of what Paul and Jen were saying, essentially, at the end of the day, we need to be able to share data with mission partners securely and efficiently. And I had a conversation with Paul about this. It's really around building this data fabric where you're using user identity, you're using things like attribute-based access control to determine who can get access to what data. The Department of Defense should be building that data fabric, and we should be working with the coalition partners to implement this federated identity that we use from an attribute perspective, data encryption to make sure individuals that should have access to data have access to it, or if they shouldn't have access to data, we're revoking their access and continuously monitoring it. That's kind of where we need to move towards.
Yeah, I'll take it from an operational perspective. When I was in Baghdad in 2016, this was during the height of ISIS. We had the Baghdad Operations Center, or Joint Operations Center, and I don't know how many coalition partners were in there, right? So trying to figure out who has what authority, identification and, of course, authorization to go in and actually get that specific information or that data. I think that's critical, especially during, a crisis thing. Now, we can compartmentalize things physically, but when it comes to speed of decision-making, OODA loop cycles and all that, I think that's the challenge is, okay, you have 25 or 26 countries in this case. How do we know who does what and who has what access? But, the second piece is when it comes to zero trust is, and Ms. Rathbun just said this, when it comes to red teams, no plan survives first contact, no matter what. So we could have the perfect ZTA, zero trust architecture, but if you don't red team it and really test it out and make sure it is actually working, then it's just a best guess.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's good. It's a good point.
Thank you. So we touched on it a little bit. Imran, you brought it up, the economic and resource differences with some of our coalition partners. So, we talked about it, but what are some other strategies that we can consider when we're partnering with countries who don't necessarily have the same resources we do?
I think the first thing we want to do is, again, answer this question of how we want to command and control and operate these data sharing environments. We do this with our small business partners. If small businesses cannot afford to do the cybersecurity at the level of expectation we have, this is NSA, this is DoD, this is Navy, then how do we bring them into our environment and have them operate in our environment? Now, data sharing, again, to your point, is going to be an issue with these countries, but countries that cannot afford their own infrastructure or to do it the way we want them to protect it using zero trust principles, I think we need to talk about how we build those environments that we can stand up and take down for the mission purpose and they can get access. But again, that gets to coming to some agreement about how you're going to manage the who. And to Mel's point, when you're in this is a job of somebody's to be managing these people who are getting access, and there's a ConOps associated with how you're going to make this environment work. And that is stuff that we sometimes forget about when we start implementing technology, about really how we're going to operate it.
And so if I can add, so this leads us into the piece that's being teased out here in terms of working with all these mission partners, and the fact that if from a U.S., the license, the IDs, we have plenty of a digital signature in the U.S. to monitor and know and verify who we are. But when it comes to our mission partners, initially you don't have that, other than our Five Eyes, you don't have that rich data about identity. But, right, as a framework and over time, again, we are restructuring how we approach this. One of the things we have that we are building with every mission partner is that general sharing of military information, right? That's the GSOMIA. That's that binding directive that says, you're going to treat my data and protect my data at a level in which I protect yours. That's a binding agreement. Well, with that comes Theater Security Corporation and a responsibility for every combatant command to build capacity into the nation in which we're doing battle with, right, as our battle partner, our mission partner. We have to do cybersecurity capacity building. So we have to start to bring them up to a level in which they are able to protect our information. We have to start driving them and influencing them towards background checks and things that we accept as good practices for security. Not every nation have those policies. We've been working, like just as an example, we're working with Japan, and they are implementing a risk management policy at their MOD level, all the way down, to holistically adopting the U.S. model. Now, you may not say that's a great thing, right? It's RMF, right? We told them that was a heavy burden. But again, being able to influence them to bring that over process-wise so they can get after those security controls. And so when we look at the way we're going to do the mission partner environment, we know there will be always a U.S.-only segment that we control. Then there's going to be a mission partner environment from a GCC, Indo-PACOM mission network, we control. Others will be invited in to share data, and then there's going to be the partner side of that network where they control. But we're going to take a responsibility to help build capacity on that side and to share our lessons learned with that side so they don't have the same cost curve that we have to meet our requirements for being involved in the mission partner environment. So there is a training tail. There is a expectation that we're going to lead them into the same technology that we have, but not necessarily at the same learning curve and learning costs because they couldn't afford it.
Copy. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was mostly covered, but ultimately it goes back to the point that we should be building the data fabric, and then we should be controlling the data and working with our mission partners to really build the identity component. I think we have really good capabilities on the TS side. We need to start working on secret and below, where we can start sharing information more effectively. Generally speaking, we've always used a network-centric based approach to communicate with mission partners. We are now starting to flatten that network and really use data and identity and data encryption as a mechanism to be able to share information. I also think that we need to be mindful of disrupted comms. So when we build any of these solutions, we need to make sure that these capabilities can work in a DDoS environment. We need to make sure that the bad actors are going to go after our network connectivity back into CONUS. How do we continue to sustain those solutions and platforms in DDoS type capability environments?
Yeah, I think from the coalition side, best with a story. So when we deploy U.S. troops, and of course contractors and govies, we use the host country networks, right? So to pass traffic back and forth. In this case, in Iraq, they had their SDNs, Secret Defense Network. Well, it was compromised, and traffic was passing through, specific traffic about attack plans. So basically, the enemy was waiting for us because they already saw what we're doing. Right? So it's understanding the why of why we need to go into the coalition partner, and not just inside of our JOC, but also outside of the base perimeters, because we're using our networks. And the second is simplicity when it comes to coalition partners. I saw a wide spectrum between Iraqis and Albanians. Now, if you don't know, ChatGPT was invented by an Albanian lady. So believe me, they're smart out there. Okay, but it's simplicity, because if they don't know how to use this equipment, the command and control out there is through WhatsApp. Right? So zero trust, yep, we can get the architecture, but if it's too complicated, they're just going to pull out their phone and start using WhatsApp to do command and control.
So to that point of simplicity, one of the things that comes up often is legacy systems and how we integrate those into some of the modern systems we're developing, whether on the U.S. side or with coalition partners. So are there any experiences with specific legacy systems that are mission critical?
I don't think I heard experience with what?
Legacy systems, integrating
Legacy
into
systems.
modern, yep.
I want to take it another way.
Okay.
For any questions. So, one thing that industry can help with, especially overseas, when it comes to host country networks, and even the Minister of Defense, Ministers of Interior, is we have an opportunity to shape what the architecture looks like. Because it's not prescriptive, it's descriptive, saying, I want you to protect my network. So we got a carte blanche to do things. So overseas, there's a lot of other countries installing their equipment. For example, Huawei. So Huawei is big in Eastern Europe. So the more we push with NATO out in that area, when it comes to legacy equipment, removing that legacy non-U.S. equipment will help accelerate zero trust for us.
Great. Thank you. I'd like to pause for a moment and see if there's any questions from the audience.
We do have some questions.
Okay.
The first question from the audience. Zero Trust sounds like a great solution for security, but seems to have some difficulties from an accessibility and usability standpoint. How are accessibility and usability being considered as Zero Trust technologies are being developed?
So we've implemented a Zero Trust platform in our Microsoft Azure offering, Flank Speed we call it. I'm not sure usability and accessibility to the customer is an issue. It's actually better because we've taken out, and we have work to do. We have, getting somebody an account in our environment. There are process pieces that have to be worked through to become more speedy. But once we've got their identity, we can bring them into the system. It's pretty quick, and we've been able to, from that experience, we also greenfielded our Flank Speed platform, so we didn't have any baggage of legacy systems or legacy connections. It's easier for us to command and control, one, and for two, for our customer who's going to operate and work in that environment to get on the environment.
I think
So I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I think for the most part, from a user perspective, it shouldn't make any. It should be invisible to them.
Yes.
They shouldn't really feel any like, hey, we've now done Zero Trust, right? So, for example, I'll give you talk about Flank Speed here. I'll give you an example of what we're doing with DISA on Thunderdome. A lot of the user traffic was being hairpined to a central security stack for inspection. We're now moving security closer to the edge. We're using some of the Microsoft capabilities as well to improve security. We're providing direct cloud access, so it's improving user performance. So I think Zero Trust is simplifying the architecture. In traditional sense, we had all these different security products that we keep stitching together that all did the same thing. So we're starting to move away from that, defense in depth model. We keep adding more and more security to do more smart security and make sure the user experience is good and they don't actually, see any difference.
If I can go back to the previous questions, there was a piece of that I thought about and I wanted to put out in the environment. When you ask about the legacy systems and perhaps the challenges that the legacy system present in a zero trust environment, right? Mm-hmm. I think all the panelist members would agree that when you start talking about zero trust, many would say it's all about the data, right? So if you came out of the intelligence community who's been doing some form of data-centric things for decades and marking their data for quite a while. But many of the DoD Title X platforms, sensors at the edge, they're not marking, right? We're not marking at the source.
No, we're not labeling.
We're not labeling, right?
Yeah.
And so you start talking about source and classifications and a few of the attributes being very important things. Well, legacy platforms that do things at the tactical edge as part of the sensors who tell you things about the blue and red picture at the tactical edge, right? So now we are bringing those things down in a domain, hitting, my NSA partners are probably in the hours, hitting some cross-domain solution in or a guarding solution and then relabeling. But that platform is still flying, and it's a bi-directional. So you're creating your own complexities of tagging and retagging and losing as with those legacy platforms at the tactical edge, right? So if it's all about the data, and I would throw this out to the DIB vendors, then we need to start with the processing speed that we have today and the miniaturization of technology. Mm-hmm. We've got to be able to tag at the sensor, right? Now I don't have to worry about the source. It's tagged at the sensor. You'll find a lot of that in IC where they absolutely tag their intel data at the source of it because they want to know at all times the source of that intel. Very important. We have to take that same culture and bring that into this environment, this our mission partner SecRel environment where we are generating and collecting data. Again, in the intel community, when I was working at one of those three-letter agencies, you couldn't create a file without having to mark it. You couldn't save it without having to mark it. Mm. You certainly couldn't send it in email without having to mark it. Well, I can do all those things now.
Yes, but now I want to take that
right.
TS data and that secret data and that unclassified data and bring it together
right.
for secret rel. And I want to know the provenance of the data. I want it labeled, but when I give it to my mission partner, I want to mask all that. We don't want them to know where the data came from. We want to be able to
right.
put those things together, integrate those three levels of classification into products that are consumable by not just our mission partners, but also our own warfighters. Don't make them the integrators.
Got it.
Provide them integrated data. So that does make you think about the entire way our infrastructure is set up today, where risk and consequence of loss of data equals network. That's got to go away.
That's right.
If we really want to embrace zero trust and manage zero trust, we do have to label our data. I think this is where generative AI can help us automate the data labeling. This is where we have to take it. To your point, zero trust is about protecting the data, knowing who's accessing it, knowing what device they're accessing it from. Those things have become the important pieces. And as we roll out zero trust across the Department of Navy, I got it. We're supposed to be by 2027 aligned to these 91 or 152 items. I don't think we're going to tip the Navy. If anyone knows how the Navy works and how many functional domains we have and how many platforms we have, that's never going to happen in 2027. But we are going to take the most important pieces and of zero trust and prioritize them. Identity, knowing end user devices, data tagging, data provenance, working on that. Also making sure that our Cyber C2 operators have the tooling and that it's integrated into those platforms for continuous monitoring, for adversarial threat assessment, because to Sean's point, the enemy is in the network. We have to assume that, and we have to attack it that way. But that took us away from the question of accessibility and usability. But it was a good conversation. So I don't know if we have to greenfield everything going forward to get rid of the weight in the baggage, but we do have to pivot our focus, to your point, onto data.
Correct.
I want to kind of piggyback off of that. So, I think one of the things that's been highlighted with Zero Trust is inventory, just what's out there, device management, right? So I brought a prop. So this thing here, I call it Thor's hammer, and the CEO or the founder of the company is like sitting over there. So, any questions? But it's an IoT device. Right? IoT. So it has to be authenticated and it has to be authorized, right, to access whatever resource it has access to. So it's much more than, of course, human beings. It's IoT. It's all devices from a device perspective.
It's people and machines. Yeah.
People and machines. But and Zero Trust now is I think putting that higher on the priority stack, because I can tell you, being when I used to wear a uniform, the Navy buzzword is OMNS. So if you're familiar with that, it's inventorying every device, endpoint device across the Navy, physical and virtual. So.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
We do. Next question. What is the biggest impediment you see to executing Zero Trust in a mission partner environment? If you were king, how would you solve it?
Or queen? Female king. Go ahead. Anyone want to take that? Biggest challenge?
Well, I think in my opinion, the biggest challenge is the interoperability challenges. I think we want to make sure that we're not building solutions that are proprietary. So as we work with mission partners, we need to be able to make sure that these systems can exchange data between other systems. And I would say the second one is the federated identity. That's really a key to working with mission partners.
We use this framework, or we use this process in the Navy. We build design concepts for our acquisition community that talk about, and we have one for Zero Trust, that talk about what things you have to take into account when you're designing. They lead to standards and guardrails so that whatever the functional domain is, the things that do need to be common, like identity solutions, or at least federated so they can work together, or source of identity, they now understand where that needs to come from. I think we need to take the same approach. To Paul's point, we're not going to build their networks potentially for them, but if we can give them standards and guardrails that they have to meet in order to connect to the mission partner data source, I think that is so. I think that's really going to be the way we have to work. And my husband works for NGA. They have a big international data standards group, because they need geospatial data to work seamlessly across all of those countries. So we'll have to do something similar in how we, on the pieces of Zero Trust, how they get implemented, or what are the left and right guardrails that need to be put in place.
Right, and so if I add a piece that I know when we say the word mission partner environment, that is so overly used. It could be U.S. mission partners, but when I think of that term and think about the biggest challenge, I'm always thinking about my coalition, my foreign partners. And so when we're trying to assess, I talked earlier about trying to assess a level of equivalence before we are authorized to have a sharing agreement, and then after that you have an information agreement, and then you're authorized to connect, right? So we INDOPACOM is not the one doing that initial assessment. It's another part of the government that goes in and assesses that country if they're equivalent. And they're not going to be equivalent. So it is a demand, a extremely high demand across the INDOPACOM theater to bring the capacity, the cybersecurity capacity of these nations to a place to where we are able to connect and have a good, full, trusted operational network environment, whether it's for exercises and quite frankly, one day maybe crisis and conflict, right? So to me, like I said, we talked about an example. We talked about cybersecurity, the Five Eyes, a basketball example. The Five Eyes is the starting five. After that, we have no bench, right? In our theater, we have two, New Zealand, Australia. Beyond that, we have a lot of work to do. Yeah. And so when you start talking about zero trust and the focus on identity and the focus on data and the marking of the data, there's a lot of guidelines that we have to bring into play with our mission partners. And there's a lot of capacity building that has to be done so this something that's even complex, I'm not using the word complicated, but complex to the U.S., right? That same complexity is in the standing in the face of our partners and the ones who are just beginning to understand the concept of zero trust. So I would say being able to take a very secure approach that we're trying to do with our partners and get our partners to understand that approach, implement that approach, and plan towards that approach at an acceptable level to the U.S.
I think there's two sort of scenarios here. You have CONUS mission partners and OCONUS mission partners. So when it's CONUS, they come to us. The problem here is scalability, meaning usually when you have mission partners come in, it's during a surge. Right? You might have 1 or 2 or 3 mission partners. Again, we're talking international. If the balloon goes up, you're talking hundreds, right? So there's got to be some standardized, repeatable, predictable process to get them authenticated, authorization, because we do this here. Overseas, this is where industry, I've learned, you're basically selling it. When you're talking to the folks overseas about cybersecurity, it's not a priority. Again, this is just from my experience, mainly in Eastern Europe because of NATO. So it's making them understand, okay, why is this a priority for you? But it's basically you have to sell it to them. It's business development 101. But once you get the key stakeholders, bought, then everything flows from there. Then it makes it a priority.
Great, thank you. One thing we've heard a lot of is, building capacity, training. I'd love to get your perspective on workforce. That's one challenge that we hear a lot, not necessarily having enough skills in the current workforce or the training program to level up the staff and workforce that we have. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that from a zero trust perspective.
Well, I think when you start pivoting towards managing your data and not your boundary, you need people who understand data and how to manage data, how to label it, how to build its provenance, how to secure it. It's a different workforce. It's a different function. We don't have a lot of, I don't know if you all knew this, but the federal government just 3 years ago established data science as an occupational series code. Data scientists, officially, not part of the ops research world. So we have work to do to recruit the right kinds of people who can help us achieve our goals from again, more focus and emphasis on controlling and understanding and managing at the data level versus the network, the boundary level.
So I would say, we often hear zero trust is a cultural change, zero trust is a journey. What you're going to see is, in the traditional sense, enterprises are very siloed. You had a team that just focused on user identity, team focused on endpoint security, maybe visibility and analytics, network. Those are all being collapsed into an integrated solution. Zero Trust at the end of the day is an integration of capabilities across the different pillars together to provide better visibility and analytics, provide better conditional access type of solution. So I think you're going to need a new workforce that understands how to operate that solution. I also make a point that one thing we're starting to see from a Zero Trust perspective, you're collecting a lot more telemetry. You're collecting a lot more sensor data. So how do we use things like AI, data, smart data analytics, pipelines, et cetera, to process that data and make decisions on that data? You have to start doing automation. You have to start building a smart data analytics strategy, and you need to have the right workforce to be able to operate that.
That's a very good point.
I think for me, it's what's the outcome we're trying to do, which is to reduce lateral movement. At least that's the Zero Trust North Star. So I love the definition of always saying this about insanity, doing the same things over and over, but expecting a different outcome, right? So if we look at how we do contracting today, or acquisition, or procurement. There's different program offices, different funding lines, but again, it's the intent of Zero Trust is to reduce lateral movement across these programs. So when it comes to with the workforce, it's really educating them. So we're all looking at the same North Star, if you will.
Great. Thank you. Any audience questions?
Yes, so next question. Operationalizing business rules makes complete sense. If we overlay Zero Trust framework implementation along with a push to cloud-based functionalities, how do you see the challenge of DDoS environments affecting this, and what is the approach to mitigation?
I think it goes back to the previous conversation I was making, that we need to make sure that we build solutions that can operate in a DDoS environment. We cannot expect to be able to backhaul all the traffic into CONET, FedRAMP, cloud service provider environments, right? So building a tactical edge solution that is fielded, that can work in a DDoS type environment is going to be critical. You need to make sure that you build solutions where you're doing analytics of that data at the tactical edge, so you're not backhauling all that data. So making smart decisions at the edge is going to be key.
Just to add on that, I think that architecting cloud and the ConOps for cloud, how we want it to work at the tactical edge. I mean, all the four big providers that are part of the JWCC all had to come to the table with tactical edge solutions that could work in a disconnected state, and then for long periods of time, and then hook back up. So I think really cloud is a key to this, to really being able to implement Zero Trust effectively and operate anywhere in the world, and get the job done. I mean, the Marines are going to be in the first island chain with their razors and their people, and they're going to want cloud that sits in the back of a razor that they can utilize disconnected, and then when they can get a signal or they need to get a signal, they can get it and they can push data back to the mothership or bring new data down. That's our reality, and designing those in a Zero Trust way helps us protect the information.
If I can add a piece again, and I clarify that I am not a Zero Trust expert. I would point to my man Dan Wade out there in the audience. I call him a Zero Trust expert. But yesterday we took a briefing from DISA and Ms. Woods, and they was talking about the cloud-based implementation and the high assurance compute. And it was interesting when she talked about there's a backplane of cloud architectures that needs to stay aligned. And so living on an island, working with partners that live on an island, and defending island, we realize that a disconnected environment is at the beginning of our crisis. It's almost inevitable. But to learn that only within just a few days of being disconnected, that parts of the cloud, depending on your instantiation, would brick itself. That's a problem, right? So there were some solutions she talked to us about that perhaps was more resilient to the DDoS environment. So we got to make sure that when people are selling us a cloud-based architecture, they're not thinking about the sweet spot inside the United States corners. Right, because when you get into a known architecture that doesn't move, it makes it pretty easy for the adversary to attack that. And so we have to plan that living in a disconnected environment is just an attribute of how warfare would go in the Indo-PACOM theater. So a solution that requires any kind of alignment to intelligence data or COP data coming from a place that may not be connected, that's not a good solution for the theater. So we just have to be really careful about that. So that disconnected environment has a significant impact.
I would like to pose, though, that given all of the recent delivery of capability, such as proliferated low Earth orbit, and there's lots that can be done. There's lots more to do. We are putting requirements on those companies delivering that capability that unless we want to be disconnected because the operation requires us to not be emitting signals, that's one thing. But I see a future where we're actually not disconnected all that often. We might not be connected the traditional way that we've been connected, but I think that given the proliferation of commercial SATCOMs, I think our operational paradigm is going to shift. We, again, the Navy there will be times where the Navy will not want to emit signals, and the Marine Corps, same thing, or any of the services, but that's by choice versus because, the cable got cut at the island or whatever. So I think that adds some interesting, a new paradigm to think through what it really means to be disconnected.
I absolutely agree. I wish every partner had agreed that they would want to use PLEO. I have some that don't want it, right? Or there's some countries that have policies that talked about the commercial ownership of their data. And so we're trying to influence them to take advantage of these opportunities for their own protection. But to be frankly, we're still fighting uphill with some of those partners, and they are key parts of our operation and how we go about defending a free and open Indo-Pacific. So I absolutely agree that PLEO is a game changer in terms of the way we move and do maritime operations. But we still have some work to do in convincing partners to fully buy in on that. There's not a lot of other options, but they still just have not, from their national security level, have not totally gone in on that. So we have some challenges.
Yeah, I think from a cloud perspective, it's on the commercial cloud side. I think, if it's in the requirements, they're going to go after it to get those requirements with zero trust. But what's more important is you have to understand, again, from an industry perspective, what is the customer's operational environment? So let's take MFA, multi-factor authentication. If I'm floating in the middle of the South China Sea and I have to connect back to the United States to check my, bank account, you have MFA, right? Well, you can't do that because you won't be able to get the code, and now you're stuck. Well, that's just simplicity, but it happens every day for both business or personal and official business, government business websites. So again, the technology's there. It's understanding, okay, let's meet the zero trust framework. Got it. But it's more important to understand what's the operational environment of that customer. I think that's the biggest challenge.
Thank you. Next question.
So in a zero trust framework with fully encrypted data, no data cache, no data store, how important is data acceleration? Is speed of data transfer across networks mission critical, and why? In industry, that speed advantage equates to time saved and the scope to get other stuff done and can be monetized. How does that translate to defense?
I think it's loss of life. If your joint fires network cannot deliver targeting data at the lowest level of latency, you are talking about losing lives or losing the war. So I think speed of data to where it needs to get, and our mission partners we will share targeting data with our mission partners going forward in the future. We can measure that. We can measure it in many ways to include loss, the impact of loss of life.
I want to hit on is decision speed. So I used to fly for the Navy, and OODA loop is a big thing. Observe, orient, decide, and act. So you get all the data, but you have to orient that thing, and hopefully artificial intelligence or machine learning will come in and speed that up. But it's making that decision and taking that action. So data acceleration, yes, but it's more important to get to that decision and that action to cause some sort of effect. So.
Did you see AI playing a role in that decision making? Yeah.
That's a good point, Mel. We don't want the warfighter to have to be the integrator. We want them to have data, trained models at the edge, sensor data they can pull in at the edge, and then have that decision advantage right there.
Great. Thank you. Next question.
What do you see as the biggest enabler to achieve zero trust?
Biggest enabler.
Well, I think the biggest enabler to achieving zero trust is, in my opinion, right? I think we talked about this. Is zero trust is an architecture. So you're not just doing a product buy. So each organization, what they're doing is, number one, coming in and doing the baseline of the current environment. So where am I from a zero trust maturity perspective? Second, they're building zero trust roadmaps and architecture. Third, they're doing an actual implementation. Fourth, they're doing a red team to verify how secure they are and how many activities and capabilities they're meeting from the DoD CIO zero trust strategy document. And then, the last piece is the continuous monitoring piece. How are they continue to meet the zero trust requirements? So zero trust doesn't end, right? So by 2027, most organizations have to meet target level activities. So after that, they have to continuously monitor and report up those, metrics.
I'm going to say it's leadership. I mean, if your leadership isn't going to buy into this concept, you're going to have a hard time getting culture to shift. It's really not. It shouldn't be hard to want to shift. This is a much better model. This allows us to design into our systems cybersecurity in the right way.
I will put two pieces. The first part, when my teams first started working with Zero Trust, they was like, it was constantly saying, this is not new technology. Okay. I said, this is not earth-shattering technology. So the idea is that it is some of the policy to create some of the standards and guidelines that will keep the department moving forward. Right, some of the guidance we are expecting to come out of our higher headquarters is just coming slow, right? It's coming slow, and then some of the new guidelines and the briefing earlier this morning talked about the BOD 005 and those kinds of policies that there's some stigmas that seem like we haven't really. They're competing policies. One policy say, I need to create a data integration layer to apply AI, ML to it so I can come up with faster firing solutions. But then I got a policy and I need to put it in separate encryption domains and with a cross domain to it, right? Those two things don't line up together, right? So we're trying to do something that is making the entire mission more effective and more optimal. But some of the policies that we're expecting that is going to enable zero trust is just coming slow, right? So I see that as one part. And of course, as you mentioned, in terms of culture change, and again, the fact that if data is extremely important, and then the marking of the data and how we mark the data and doing the minimum essential marking across the fabric and all the things we do to make sure that then that data and those identities are able to work together to make a zero trust architecture work properly. In the DoD side, and especially in some of the combat ops networks, we simply don't tag stuff, right? We're not. We have to, but we don't, right? We're going to zero trust, but that's a behavior change. And so we have to get there.
We also need it for generative AI. We can't really actually leverage that until we start labeling and tagging our data.
Right.
I think, a way to not achieve but accelerate zero trust. I would never want to be in front of my boss getting yelled at. And this kid, it's Rathbone sometimes. But what I mean by that is, if you really want to accelerate zero trust, red team the network. You cannot beat reality. So if you red team it, and now you say, okay, you said you were fine, you got the ATO, but look, we just went from point A to point B to point C to point Z networks. That will accelerate zero trust.
If I can add just one more piece to that, tying it to this question, to the last question, we talked about accelerating data. And that's one thing I'm asking my team. When I listen to the amount of information and the impact of dragging all these attributes through my limited bandwidth, there's some experimentation that still needs to be done to make sure that we are truly going to be able to scale. I don't think the Intel community has seen a pipe they couldn't fill up. Right. So as we start talking about sensor to shooter, and often that sensor to shooter absolutely starts in the intel world with a lot of heavy attributes tied to it, and then we're going to add more to it. So we have to make sure that in a combat environment and how these battle systems, these are some of them legacy battle systems, how they're going to be able to operate in this environment, and can we scale to give them the pipes they need to continue to do effective operations.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on that? Good. Okay. All right, we have time for one more from the audience. If there are. Yeah.
I'll just,
Go ahead.
I'll just add one more from an industry perspective about how to accelerate or achieve zero trust. You know, we, as an industry, we are legally binded by the contract that we're awarded, right? So if zero trust is not in the contract, it makes it more difficult to achieve, to meet the 91, 150, whatever activities there is to do. So I think that is definitely one way from a, sitting on the industry perspective. If I read the contract and go, okay, I got to execute X, Y, and Z, and I'm being measured on it, I think they'll go faster.
So to that point, what role can industry play in helping advance zero trust?
Not create cottage industries that are compliance-based, that try to get the 91 or the 151, right? Take a strategic approach. It's a framework. How do we get to the most critical pieces of that framework? And so somebody said what the question was about enabling. We've created the Naval Identity Service, and we're putting it out there for all of our programs to use for free because we want them to have we want them to have identity access, credentialing and access management. That is a critical piece to the zero trust framework. And if you're going to go after something, let's go after those kinds of things. So when industry comes in, live the principles and make sure that whatever you're doing, whether it's in the contract or not, live the principles and make sure that the systems you're designing embody those principles. That is how industry can help us.
I think from my perspective for industry, right, I think the biggest thing is continue to promote interoperability. What you don't want to end up with is silos of zero trust capabilities across different MILDAPs and COCOMs that don't talk to each other. So building true interoperability, like one example being is as you start implementing things like policy decision point and policy enforcement point, how are we taking different platforms, different COTS solution and making sure that they can talk to each other to exchange that information to make conditional access decisions. So I think interoperability is a big thing that we need to focus on. As everybody is moving towards the zero trust journey, we've got to make sure that interoperability is front and center.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
I think happy hour is in like 30 minutes.
So do we and our mission partners have the right and enough personnel, technology, policy, funding, partnerships to achieve zero trust?
Well, you said the technology is not new, and the need to secure your environments and or your data is not new. So we're spending money on these things. We might not just be spending it in the right way. We have this approach, really, it's about divestment. It's called cattle drive. How do we stop doing the things that we don't need to be doing to afford the things we need to be doing? And so I think, again, making that pivot and going after the high priority, biggest payoff pieces first that allow you to stop doing things that you are doing, that's how we fund this. Do our mission partners have the right people and enough people? They're probably in the same boat we're at, and if they're not they're not a wealthy country, then they probably won't get there as quickly as we want them to, and we'll have to look at opportunities to environment share, where we command and control the environment, but they work in the environment. I mean, that's more State Department, negotiation policy than it is technology, because we could do it with technology. Just that. There is an opportunity to do this without spending more money, but you have to refocus what you're investing in from a cybersecurity perspective today.
And if I can add, again, I talked earlier, I know there's a lot of ways you can take mission partners, so I'm speaking from my coalition partners, my foreign partners. I say outside of New Zealand, Australia, when you come into some of the partners, some of the ASEAN nations, that some of them are quite astute in the zero trust technologies and defensive, but some others, whether it's personnel, technology, policy, the answer is no, 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 and no. Right? Across the board, the answer is no. We are working with numerous nations to build a cybersecurity workforce. So it hasn't been exercised, it hasn't been certified, it hasn't been NetOps, it hasn't been through the wickets of withstanding attacks. They are building a cybersecurity workforce. Well, in terms of technology, we're working often, Cyber Command and myself and part of OSDP, we go to various nations and we're talking about how can the U.S. share with them certain technologies to understand how to censor their networks, right? And now we're still at the domain level. We haven't even started talking about how to get them to a very data-centric environment, right? We got to get them to that level so that we can even consider them to be an equivalency so we can get some of these agreements in place, right? So that leads right to the Department of State. And there is a driver. I may not have any Department of State fans out here in the audience, but we talk about these things in a very DOD or IC kind of centric fashion. But most of my Department of State people don't talk cybersecurity. So how are you going to espouse a cultural change about the growth and enhancement of cybersecurity to a foreign nation if you yourself don't speak cybersecurity? So many of my country teams, when they're inside of the countries and trying to influence them, they don't understand the technology, the policy. And they understand money. They understand that funding piece, right? But getting them to take that and making it a priority for what cybersecurity purchase you would make to align that with a good partnership with the U.S. from a defense perspective, that's a difficult. So when I look across my coalition partners, I would absolutely say we have a significant challenge in personnel in developing a workforce. We, the U.S., is still trying to retain and build and train and hold on to a workforce. We're having our challenges. They have the same. Technology, they have the same. And again, so across the board in these questions, yes, we're going to have to tackle that, but then that's where we are also in parallel working across the board with these countries to try to do that capacity building and understanding across those four areas you talked about.
Yeah, I think it's an operational risk kind of analysis. So in CONUS, we can control it. We bring our mission partners into our JOC. We can start controlling it that way. OCONUS, that's different. However, from an industry perspective, there's FMS, foreign military sales, right? So you got U.S. contracts, U.S. dollars helping to build that country's not just capability but capacity. So we can make an influence out there. But from a risk analysis perspective, if we're in CONUS, yes, I think we got the right, personnel, technology, policy, funding. It's OCONUS. That's where we need to help them with through FMS and DCS and all the other security cooperation stuff we have.
And even in adding to the FMS, you talked about making sure that contract has the right cybersecurity language and ZT language in the contract. If you don't put it in the contract, even when we're dealing with a partner nation, then you can't expect to hold them to it, right?
Right.
So we have to make sure we're driving the right language and culture into the contract to expect that to be delivered. That's absolutely correct.
So we've talked about the concept of zero trust, some of the challenges. When we look to the future, what makes you most excited about zero trust?
I think the future of zero trust is going to be really AI-driven policies. Ultimately, you're going to see, right as organizations adopt zero trust, they start building their zero trust policies, which Paul hit on earlier about the challenges with consistent policies. I think AI is going to essentially do things like, pattern analysis. For example, if a user is connecting with, devices, device health posture, user identity, behavior analytics, you're going to use AI models to do the analysis and pattern matching to determine if that user, what risk is that user at, and are we going to give them access to what data? So I think the future of zero trust will be, really driven through AI from an AI policy perspective, and I think that's exciting. Also dangerous.
Okay, sure. I would say what makes me most excited about the zero trust idea. Like, again, working at a combatant command, we have a very, very specific function about why we exist, right? We are combatant command, why we exist. The idea that again, when we start talking about a data-centric environment with tagged data, and then the idea of now some of the technologies allowing you to take from end to end of a kill chain or end to end of a targeting chain, may be a better sensitive word, targeting chain, right? Sensitive shooter, being able to put all of that relevant data into an environment where you can apply a significant amount of automation so that the processing time can significantly shrink. I've been in some guidance, acquisition, and targeting shops where they're still using spreadsheets. This is the attributes of the target. This is the attributes of the sensor. Oh my God! That you are never going to win against a very competent adversary if you are doing targeting that way. And so, zero trust at the data level. And oh my God, if you dare actually bring some intel data in with your rest of your DoD's COP data and targeting data, where you can really do target weapons pairing at the speed of need, we could really do some great things in enhancing how we do mission effectiveness for targeting and what at the essence of combat ops, right? It's all about the red target, blue target, destroy target, right? So that's exciting to say that we now have a framework where we may be able to securely enhance the way we do battle management. A long ways to go, but I'm excited about it because it opens a door where we can do this with our mission partners, right? Because they are absolutely necessary to have that joint battle management and not just pairing a red target to a U.S. firing battery, but a red target to a partner firing battery, right? So that's the advantage, expanding the scope of what mission target pairing looks like in an automated way. That's exciting.
Great.
Okay. Well, so for me, I'm excited because we're migrating away from compliance or more outcome-based. Case in point, again, this is an Albanian story. So, I hired some cyber engineers, but these were practitioners, folks that can actually code, attack, red team. And so they were my cybersecurity zero trust experts. They went in and red teamed the whole thing and figured out that here's all the gaps, patch it all up. It's not compliance-based and it's continuous. So I think as we look at our adversaries' TTPs, it's not what it was 20 years ago when I was, doing coding. If you go to DEF CON, you'll see some amazing stuff what these folks are doing. So it's catching up with the current adversaries' TTPs, but I think it's really a cultural shift to go, okay, cyber warfare really is multi-domain warfare, and we need to figure out from cyber warfare espionage to kinetic combat, and how can we protect across the board when it comes to zero trust.
Well, I'm most excited because I think it allows us to get rid of RMF.
Yes.
But yes, more clapping. Our golden objective is securely move data from anywhere to anywhere. The zero trust framework, if we implement all of its pieces, to include the continuous monitoring, the cybersecurity, cyber C2 operations piece, we are now living and breathing cyber secure environments that allow us that data maneuverability that we so need for the reasons that Paul you just articulated, for all the reasons said here. So I think that it offers great opportunity, again, to live, breathe, and execute cybersecurity every day, and not for it to be a bolt-on. or an afterthought. And it requires, for us, what it means from an execution perspective is making sure that our Cyber C2 operators are sitting with our acquirers, are sitting with our functional owners to make sure that we are delivering capabilities that from the get-go are cyber secure.
Great, thank you. So we're coming near the end of our discussion, so I want to give everyone a few minutes just for closing remarks. If there's any key point that you'd want to have the audience take away from this discussion. Imran, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot, different things at this panel, but I think that the key thing I would say is I think as a nation, we are well ahead on our zero trust journey. We need to be able to help our mission partners. I think Jen talked about how we build the data fabric and allowing mission partners to be able to leverage our fabric, and then providing them the tools like federated identity to be able to access that data. I think that's going to be critical working with mission partners moving forward.
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about this very important topic. I look forward to solving the mission partner environment with my Indo-PACOM partners and other COCOMs because I think that, again, critical to mission success. So thank you.
I would say, again, I certainly hats off to my friends and colleagues from CENTCOM and UCOM because, again, it is not a mark of success when the combatant commands have to start doing the acquisition. That's actually a mark of failure. But if you have to do it, have some partners that you can collaborate with and move fast and stay interoperable and compatible and get it done so the warfighters can go out and conduct a mission and come home safely. So again, from a collaboration standpoint, from speaking on behalf of Admiral Colino and our team at Indo-PACOM, we certainly appreciate the massive amount of support that we're getting, one from our partners in the COCOMs, from Cyber Command and NSA and across the department, right? The concept of pivoting to the Pacific is alive and well, and we are seeing that support from across the department to get things done. So when it comes to this mission partner environment, there's no way that Brad Draper and Dan Wade and the entire team could have moved this fast if we didn't have the strong support and collaboration from across the department. And so just a big thank you to all those agencies that's collaborating with this team to get things done.
You know, I made a promise when I was back in Iraq, and I really appreciate, the top-down, the leadership to drive this. So it's always about the end user. In this case, the men and women are deployed, in harm's way. So I got to be in Baghdad in the middle of near Mosul during ISIS. Met a couple soldiers, and I said, hey, if you had one thing, because, these folks all just had M4s. If you had one thing, what did you want? What do you want? And he said, we just want that thing to work. And it was a radio, right? He said, we just want that radio to work because when something hits the fan, we got the United States of America's air power above us, right? So I think we talk about zero trust, but at the end of the day, when that 18-year, 19-year-old soldier has to hit a button, that thing has to work. So, no, but I appreciate, driving the technology, but at the end of the day, it's about helping those men and women out there. So thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, let's give one more round of applause for this group. What an incredible, thank you. Thank you to Stephanie for putting this panel together. I saw her working late last night with all of her notes and getting this, and that was a lot to do. So Stephanie, thank you very much for your dedication. And to the panelists, thank you very much for your time today and for sharing your expertise. There will be a donation that will be made into the Windward Wounded Warriors. It will be made in your name on behalf of AFCEA, so thank you for that very much.